lecture dari Pak Francesco Bandarin. Diharapkan beliau jam 3 akan masuk, tetapi tadi beliau akan ada pemeriksaan kesehatan sebentar, ada kemungkinan sedikit terlambat begitu. Jadi ya kondisi kita sekarang ini kan memang penuh ya dengan pemeriksaan kesehatan. Tetapi sebelum itu, yang pertama terima kasih sudah memenuhi undangan kami untuk hadir di sini. Saya lihat banyak sekali rekan-rekan baik profesional maupun mahasiswa. Dalam waktu yang memang relatif singkat pemberitahuan dari kami, dan kegiatan ini memang dirancang sekaligus untuk merayakan Hari Pusaka Dunia yang akan jatuh pada tanggal 18 April. Mungkin sebelum kita nanti akan sampai pada acara utama, kami nanti akan menunjukkan beberapa buku dari Pak Francesco, atau biasa juga dipanggil Pak Bandarin, begitu, yang teman-teman semua bisa nanti melihat apa saja isinya yang belum pernah melihatnya. Baik, sekali lagi terima kasih kepada yang sudah hadir. Saya lihat ada Bu Frances Avandi dari Bandung, Pak Suhardi Hartono, ada Mbak Dina dari Jakarta, Nadia dari Jakarta, banyak sekali teman-teman yang di luar mahasiswa di arsitektur UGM. Dan memang di dalam kegiatan di arsitektur UGM, pada semester ini kami membuka satu mata kuliah baru yang memang diberi judul adalah Historic Urban Landscape. Kemudian mohon Bapak dan Ibu mengisi daftar hadir sebagaimana disampaikan dalam chat. Kemudian nanti ketika selama presentasi Pak Bandarin, bisa kalau akan bertanya, silahkan mengisi di chat terlebih dahulu, agar nanti kami bisa meminta satu persatu untuk menyampaikan, atau nanti akan kami bacakan. Mas, dan saya akan perkenalkan dalam mengajar di Historic Urban Landscape, saya bersama Dr. alias Abiwa, Widita Abiwa. Nah, ini sudah kelihatan di sini. Silahkan Mas Abi, saya manggilnya Mas Abi, untuk ya sedikit menyampaikan sesuatu. Monggo.
Iya, terima kasih Bu Sita. Jadi yang saya Bu Sita ungkapkan, saya mendapat kesempatan untuk turut berkontribusi mengisi kuliah ini. Jadi juga saya sendiri juga banyak belajar dan merupakan sebuah privilege bagi saya untuk insya Allah nanti sebentar lagi turut menyimak paparan dari Pak Bandarin. Jadi saya juga berterima kasih atas network Bu Sita sehingga Pak Bandarin insya Allah juga bisa turut hadir pada sesi sore ini. Barangkali itu yang sedikit saya coba sampaikan. Sangat senang bisa bertemu, menjalin koneksi baru dengan Bapak Ibu yang belum saya kenal sebelumnya, sehingga insya Allah nanti bisa ada forum-forum lain kita bisa bertemu lagi. Oke, matur nuwun.
Baik, sambil menunggu. Francesco, welcome.
Good morning. Hi. Hi, how are you doing? Sorry, I was rushing back home, but it's okay.
I'm very happy that
very happy
you
too.
are
How are
coming.
you doing? How are you doing?
It's fine. Now I just introduced also my partner on teaching is alias Widita.
Alias, hello.
You can see I call him Abi. And I just blessed this morning in our time that for my students as well and my colleagues, and they're also coming want to see you because many people would like to hear from you directly. So
thank you, Sita. Thank you very much.
Once again, it's our honor, all of us, that we can meet you, we can talk, and your book is in our hand all the time.
You see, thank you very much.
Yes.
You see, it's a sunny day. I have a sun on my face. It's a sunny day in Paris. It's
you are in Paris, not in Venice.
No, I was in Venice until a month ago. Then I came here because I had things to do here, and so I, sort of switch between the two. But it's spring is coming here, so and we hope also hope is coming because the city is in a big lockdown at the moment. With all this COVID crisis. I suppose you also have some problems there, like the rest of the world. But overall, it's okay. We can survive. Thanks to Zoom.
Okay. 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 Not to wait for further ado. Please, you can start.
Thank you very much. But first of all,
the question then will be.
Let me say one thing. We have a 1 hour and a half, including the questions, right? So about an hour of talk and half an hour of questions. But let me say first of all that I'm really happy to be with you today. First of all, for many reasons. The first one is that you probably don't know, but I'm a passionate of Indonesia, and in particular Yogyakarta. It's the country and the city I really love. And really would like to come back at some point and see how things are going. But I've seen that 2-3 years ago, there's been a proposal for inscription in the World Heritage List of the Historic Center, and this is very good. And I would just maybe like to know what's happening there in that front, seeing whether you are proceeding with that thing, because since I first saw Yogyakarta, which was long ago, but maybe before most of the students even were born in the 90s. I realized that the city is a real jewel, has really outstanding values, that need to be preserved in its long history, which has dates back to many centuries and millennia. So and also values in terms of model for country and the region also, in terms of preservation of historic artifacts and historic fabrics, urban fabrics. So and let me say that I'm so happy to be back virtually and to meet you, your colleagues, and new students. And the second reason that I saw that you are really interested in the historical landscape as a tool. So I think my task today is just to provide some additional framework on how things are evolving, what kind of issues we are trying to deal with, how things have developed in other parts of the world, the experiences and so on, and perhaps it really get from you also some directions and guidance on how you intend to use this for the preservation of heritage. So let's perhaps start. Of course, I prepared some images because it's much easier for Zoom with no images. Would be really boring.
Yes, okay. Maybe Pak Bandarin bisa diberi co-host. Yes. Okay. Wait a moment.
And I see that there are a number of students from I suppose from the different departments there.
From department as well as professional, from ICOMOS Indonesia as well, also
excellent.
coming. Yeah, and also from Indonesian Architects Associations.
Yes, very good.
Yes, they really
Well,
want
so we have
to
a great
meet you.
variety of.
Yeah, so it's kind of public lecture now.
Oh my God!
It's fun. We are very
Big
happy to have you.
Big responsibility you gave me. But you know, this actually makes it even more interesting for me because we can have, you know, the impression of different you know, visions and different approaches from different categories of professionals. So I think it will be very good to have an exchange later on. I'm very interested in what's happening in the country in terms of you know, urban conservation, but preservation in general, but you know, urban conservation in particular, because as you know, it's always the most fragile one. You know, as we know, this is one of the reasons why we have this HUL, the historical landscape recommendation, recognizing that, you know, cities are really exposed to many pressures and transformation, as we will see now. Now, what I will do, I want to do two things. Well, first, somehow frame the historical landscape in a broader context in terms of policy making, international policy making, because, you know, sometimes it's seen as a thing in isolation, but it is not, because it cannot be. You know, it's a result, a product of an international discussion, of an international action, and it's a policy. It's an international policy, so it cannot be disjointed from the rest. So I want to see what are the connections. I think this is very important for the students, because it's true, and you will see that the world of urban policy internationally has gone very far in the past few years. So I think it's important to frame the historical landscape in the broader picture. It's something that I try to do in the introduction to the third book that we've done, the one that's called you know, the one on urban conservation, reshaping urban conservation, and also maybe looking ahead a little bit, because, you know, the students are all in their 20s, you know, so they have a long view, longer than
long way
mine,
to
or
go.
long way to go. So I always try to have a kind of long shot. I know it's very risky and sometimes even you know, can be misleading, but a long shot is there, you know, the century essentially, you know, what will happen. And so we would try to at least pinpoint some of the key features, you know. And fortunately, you know, the urban processes are relatively slow. They're not like technology or things that changes every week. The urban process is a long process, so we can have a certain degree of you can limit our errors at least. Let me just put here it is. Look, that's first of all in honor of your palace. And,
back to Taman Sari, though.
Taman Sari, and a really great you know, interaction, cultural interaction between West and East. You know, this is really a nice one. And it's really close to the Kraton and so on. So it's really, I think it should be in the precinct that will be presented for all heritage. And but you know, what we are going to talk today is more the urban landscape. So I know I've seen in your syllabus that you are really very advanced in getting to know all what's happening. So I really have to apologize a little bit because I may even repeat certain things that you've done during the course, you know. But yeah, sometimes
it's fine. Yes.
Yeah. No. So my task is to focus on the historical landscape, which, as you will see, is well, it's actually a strange animal in terms of in terms of its nature, because it's a bit of a charter, like a professional charter, but it doesn't want to be a charter. It wants to be something flexible and adjustable. So we never call it a charter. We call it an approach. We see that word approach here was long discussed. So it's actually a way to address, urban conservation. It's not just the rule, the mechanisms, or although it's, there are some indication, but it's less prescriptive, so to say, than a professional charter. I think this is a good way to address the great uncertainty and perhaps dynamics that surrounds urban changes. And we are in a century that has, in which humanity has become urban, majority, as you know, and cities will be on the forefront. This is sometimes, in international politics, you don't see it very much because, governments and states are taking the command of operations, but in reality, things happen in cities. And we have seen now even more with this crisis, because, you see, this is a picture in New York, the High Line and so people and so on. But in reality, cities today are more like this, are more hit by this very mega crisis of COVID. Maybe not everywhere in the same way, and I hope not in your case, but you go to most cities in Europe or North America and so on, you find that now the crisis has hit tremendously city life. So everything we say today, I think everything we say in this season should take this into consideration. Now, this crisis was not foreseen. It was something that happened in a way that is was not foreseeable. So no charter, no recommendation, no policy could include it. But it's a very big test for ways in which cities are managed and how a city can rebound after this mega crisis. And we will see some of these effects, in many sectors that concern historic areas. I think that we forget this, we don't get it now, because this is a game changer. The COVID is a game changer, and of course we have all the long past and experiences and mechanisms and so on. But really and truly, we think that COVID is changing the way in which cities in general and historic cities behave as mechanisms and so on. So therefore, this affects a lot their conservation outlooks and so on. So let's not. I have maybe at the end we will discuss that. I think it's important to focus on COVID and see maybe HUL and COVID. What is the relationship? It's very complex, and it's not something we have answers. But so at the moment I enjoy this very famous painting by the Italian De Chirico, who had somehow in a visionary manner had foreseen the COVID crisis many decades ago. Now, so what I want to do today is to show the connection, as I said, between HUL and policies. Most of it will be the international, the big ones, the Sustainable Development Goals. As you know, this is a set of objectives or goals that were issued by the United Nations in 2015. It was already 6 years old, and they call it the Agenda 2030. So they're valid for 15 years. But 15 years are not very much in terms of global processes. So we are already there. In fact, now we're in 2021. Soon, I would say, in a couple of years, we will start discussing the results of these goals, how are they being achieved or not, and they will be preparing the next goals, because it takes a few years of this international discussion to. So I think that when they set up for 15 years the international development goals, and they're very short in a way, but meaning that we will have in a very few years again a rebound of all this discussion that took place in the beginning of the year from 2010 to 2015. And I mark this because this is the first case and this moment in international policy where, in fact, the cultural heritage, culture, all these soft power elements, were actually introduced. If you take the previous Sustainable Development Goals, which were issued in the year 2000, they're very much more simple, and they somehow go to the basics, like hunger, conflicts, this kind of thing, health. These ones are more elaborated, and we will come back on this. So this first thing is we're going to frame HUL in the Sustainable Development Goals. We're going to frame it in this one, which is very important. This is the Habitat 3, the conference that was organized in 2016 by the United Nations. Of course, it was sponsored and materially organized by the agency Habitat. The agency is the UN Agency for Human Settlements, but it's a UN, overarching UN process. And this is a very important moment of reflection on cities, because this conference is done every 20 years. So the first one was done in 1976 in Vancouver, the second one in Istanbul in 96, and then this one 2016. So you see, 20 years, it's a long shot, but again, because cities change slowly, I think it's important to use these moments to assess them. And the first conference was mostly on slums. The 1936 was essentially on the housing crisis and the slums. The second one, in 96, focused more on territorial development, intermediate cities, and these kind of things. This one, 2016, although it focused on many issues, but essentially the real thing was the metropolitanization of the world, because this is the first conference on cities that takes place after humanity has become predominantly urban, which happened in 2012 or something like that, with 50% of humanity living in cities. Now we are already 55, 56, and growing, right? And of course the predictions are that by mid-century, this is why I like the long shots, because most of the students will be there to observe. In the mid-century, we will reach 65, between 65 and 70% of the world. So when I'm saying cities are the future, it's just because it is already predicted by demography and by migrations that cities will be the core of any process, political, economic, environmental, social, cultural, etc., etc. Everything will happen in cities. It's already happening in cities. So in a way, cities will become also a much bigger political actor. Where it's obvious now, because some cities that exist in the world, like mega cities like you have in your country, are bigger than countries, than many countries that are members of the UN. So, and some cities that are becoming now monster cities, like I don't know, from Tokyo to the Pearl Delta cities, Guangzhou in China, and even Sao Paulo in Brazil. So they go for the 30 millions. 30 millions is like a country, it's essentially. So their power will be very, very, very strong, very, very important. And of course, the role of that section, or that part of the city that we try to preserve and so on, also I think will become very important, both as in terms of elements of the city life and memory and so on, but also as a model for future urban development. I always say that, and I think the HUL says it also, that historic cities are not just the past. No, they are also a kind of open book for designing the future, especially now that we are talking about sustainability and environment. And we have to look at models that were in fact developed in times in which energy was very scarce, and their energy consumption was very, very limited. So they're quite good model for development. So that will be the second frame. And third, I would like to talk about this policy report that we produced for the 2016 Habitat conference. And this was a very big effort. I think in a way I see it as a kind of a follow-up of the HUL, because HUL was adopted in 2011. And then after that, we started, at UNESCO, trying to connect all the things that we were doing to the bigger picture. And this one is the link. Now, this document that you can find in the internet, and you download it in many languages, in English, French, even Chinese is there. It's actually a very thick or report. I think this is almost like a textbook. You can actually use it as a because I conceived it as a kind of a textbook for urban policies rooted in culture, and I think it's an interesting thing. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so as you can see, I see HUL, historical Valencia, not as an island, but as part of a larger framework of urban policies that find in local, national, and international level their development and their future outlook. All right, so that's the program for today. Sita, is that okay? Do you have any questions for this, or it's something that I'm stepping somewhere, out of the picture? Can you tell me?
No, it's go ahead.
Okay, good.
Yes, it is very, very important for us.
Okay, so now let me focus on one dimension first of HUL, which is, I don't think it's the most important, but for many people it is, so I think we should focus. It is, in fact, part of the international written, system of recommendations and guidance and guidelines for urban conservation. So we cannot look at HUL without looking at its predecessors and the kind of where it is sitting, because it doesn't come out of the blue. It comes out of a long history of reflection, discussion, and on heritage. Of course, I'm not going to go for a long history, although, as you may have seen reading my book, I really like historical reconstruction, because they're really important to understand where we are, but we have to remember at least the key moments. And one of the first key moment is in the 1930s, right, when this conference was done. It's called the Athens Conference. This is nothing to do with Le Corbusier and the Athens Charter, right? It's a different one. In fact, sometimes some people confuse it, but they're not. They're completely different. They actually just happened. Both of them happened in Athens, but in 2 years apart. But this is not the Charter of Modernism. This is the charter of the first international meeting of conservation people, experts and professionals. He was therefore somehow the basic foundation for everything that followed. Is not very well known for many reasons. One of them is that at that time it was the first one, so it was limited in terms of size and so on, and not big meetings like we do today. Also, communication at that time was different from today. Nobody had Twitters and emails and so on. And also they had that big language issue, so everybody was writing in his own language. So, the thing, in fact, ended up, being very difficult to circulate, because there were papers in Hungarian, in Latvian, and so all sorts of languages. It was very difficult. Europe was not yet kind of a easy communication framework. So, and also, at that time there were big crises, the depression, and so on. Then the war came, World War II. So, in fact, the impact of this conference was limited to a very small number of professionals, but it was enough to sustain, after World War II, the drafting of everything that we know, for Venice Charter in particular, which is, the number one, the piece that somehow gives the foundation to the issue of heritage conservation. This is in 1964. This is even before ICOMOS. ICOMOS was created in 1965. So this is really pre-ICOMOS. We could say prehistory, but it's pre-ICOMOS, and it is a charter of great importance. It was long debated. Certainly derived from the Athens Conference. If you look at the two documents, you see the relationship, but with a much bigger, say, consciousness of the ways in which professionals had to address the issue of conservation. I could even say that it was largely influenced by some of the Italians that managed the conference. So they were strongly influenced by an Italian vision of monuments, which is strictly conservative and very, say, linked to the issue of authenticity. So this issue comes back, starts there. Authenticity appears, the term appears in our world of conservation, appears for the first time in this document, with all the consequences that we can have we have in the following half a century. This is a charter for monuments largely. It really doesn't address cities. Of course, it talks about setting, but setting of a monument. So essentially, they see cities as a kind of kind of a surrounding of monuments, not a value per se. So it is in a way a bit limitative, for our purposes. In fact, even ICOMOS itself recognized that, and even UNESCO, they knew that this was really limited to, too much focus on individual monuments, where they were archaeological monuments or symbolic monuments or sections of city, like we could have in many cities, specific area that have monumental values, but not on the city per se. So in fact, when they did the convention, they were still in 1972. They were still in the spirit of looking at monuments. The convention. If you read the convention, and of course I'm gonna go blasphemic now. If you read the convention, convention is really primitive on this issue. It's almost almost blind on what cities are. The definition of cities in the convention is group of buildings. It's today. You take the text of the convention, a city is defined as group of buildings. It's something unimaginable, of course. When you present today, as of today, 2021, you present a urban complex to the World Heritage World Heritage nomination, ICOMOS has to define it as a group of buildings. It's almost ridiculous. Something we've been trying to change, and I hope I haven't lost hopes that it will change at some point. But still today is a group of buildings. Fortunately, the debate was more advanced than that. And in 1976, and I point that to the students, have a look at this recommendation. You can download it from UNESCO's website. The 1976 recommendation of the historic areas is the first moment in which larger areas are recognized as heritage. I think it's really revolutionary in a way. It comes very late, really, because as you will see in a moment, operations for urban conservation are already started in the 1960s. But it really is a recognition of the value of historic areas for society and for communities, and it starts putting this issue of preservation of parts of the city which are not particularly monumental. They are simply a fabric, or surrounding a fabric that has, of course, its own value because it represents a moment of history of a certain city. So it is a typology that it needs to be somehow preserved and so on, which is, of course, as you can hear from my from me, it's already closer to the modern approach. So 1976 is extremely important recommendation, and perhaps the last recommendation, UNESCO recommendation, that deals with urban heritage before the 2011 historical landscape recommendation. So they're almost, I don't know, you count 45 years there between the two. No, 31, anyway, 45. So it's important for us. It was a point of reference, and we even mentioned that in the documents and all that. And so I think if you want to understand HUL, you have to look at this one. Then ICOMOS, because of course now the Charter of Venice, it was so primitive, so to say, started thinking about, and in '87 they did this other document, which is called the Washington Charter. This is a charter, really officially adopted, approved, validated text of the entire organization. So the approval of a charter is always very complex in a global organization as ICOMOS. It took many years, but in '87 they came out with this Washington Charter, because it was done in Washington, nothing to do with it. and I think this one is more advanced maybe than the '76 recommendation, but the spirit is the same. But it really talks about cities, and very clearly it is about historic cities, and it is very, very detailed, very, I would say, very prescriptive, if I can use this term, in terms of what can and should be done on preserving cities. I think it's because it's the last urban charter. Of course, there is a more recent charter called La Valletta Charter of e-commerce, but this one is the one that has the meat. I think it's the reference. So again, download it, study it. It's the reference for international approaches to urban conservation. But as you will notice by reading it, it comes from an age. I mean, every charter was done in a certain time, so time counts. They become historical. 87 was still a time in which the world was optimistic on how to manage cities. And you can see that this charter reflects an optimism, a basic optimism that cities, that the governments at all levels, national and local, etc., do have the power to control, regulate, manage historic areas by either by expropriation or by regulation, or market mechanism or normative mechanism. So that is the view is that the government can and will do it. Now we know that this is not exactly what happened, in general. In some areas, maybe it happened more than others, but in general, if you look at the world, we cannot say that in urban affairs, urban management and public control and expropriation and purchase of land and so on has dominated. On the contrary, we see the private market having had the shots in the past 50 years, so and the results are visible, of course, in the very important transformations that historic areas have gone through in many parts of the year, sometimes even total destruction. So let's say there is an optimism that maybe we can, a distance of 40 years, we can we can evaluate, assess, and judge, but it still remains an important text. So I suggest that you look at it. And then I want to point to two more documents which are very important because they open up to the ideas of the historical balance. The Nara Declaration. Nara Declaration is another complex advancement. Sometimes conceptual advancement happen either occasionally or sometimes because there are some contrasts. And in this case, the issue that was at stake was the issue of authenticity, because authenticity is a concept that is strongly because it was created, it was generated in the European context, is strongly linked to the conservation of the substance matter, the material existence, physical existence of an object. Now you have many countries and cultures where the physical existence of an object is not so critical. What's more important are the values that are associated to it. Now, and of course, Japan was the case, but I'm sure in Indonesia you have similar things, because the Oriental cultures are less attached to the material survival of the physical survival of the material, of the original materials. So in 94, this meeting was done where something interesting came up for the first time. Authenticity was, of course, respected and preserved as a concept and so on, but it was somehow associated to a concept of diversity. So it's true that authenticity was preserved and nobody touched it because it's like a sacred cow, but diversity became dominant. So okay, authenticity is there, but authenticity derives from cultural diversity. So it's somehow rooted in the diversity of social structures. So every society, in a way, it defines its own authenticity. This relativism, I think, is very modern. I think it's very important because, of course, the world is very articulated. We cannot just rely on Eurocentric European visions, and because otherwise nothing will work anymore. And I think it's an important advancement. It's very dangerous, to put diversity, to associate diversity, which is a relativistic concept, to authenticity, which is an absolutistic concept. But somehow you have to find some mediation, and I think e-commerce has been struggling, since then, with this mediation. Sometimes accepting, sometimes not accepting. Very, in the World Health Convention is relatively conservative, I would say, more advanced in other areas and so on. And also in certain parts of the world, even more advanced than the Nara Declaration, because you probably know this charter, which was it's an ICOMOS charter. So it's the same, although it's done by Australia, ICOMOS. So people say it's regional ICOMOS, but a regional charter, I don't think so, because once you have created a set of principles, they cannot be just for one region. But anyway, it was done by the Australians. The Australians are, have to always to confront a very big issue, which is the pre-existence of another people before the Europeans came in there. And so, once you look at cultural heritage, you have to understand how the other group looks at cultural heritage. It cannot just be the European model. So this charter, in a way, tries to overcome this very difficult issue. How to somehow try and find a common denominator between the Aboriginal, the Australian Aboriginals, which have been there for 40,000 years, and the Europeans have been there for 3 centuries, and bringing, of course, their values and so on. And the solution was found, I think, in a very elegant manner. So the Burra Charter, I'm a supporter, because the Burra Charter somehow detaches, the physical existence of an object, and so and the values that are associated. So introducing the concept of significance, because if you make this distinction between the physical existence and the values that are supported by a physical artifact or a physical feature, then both worlds can find their way. For the Aboriginals, which very often do not even have or want to have significance associated to built environments or built objects. Sometimes the significance is associated to natural. Most time is associated to the natural elements. You certainly know the site of Uluru. If you don't know the site of Uluru, have a look, which is right in the center of Australia, the middle, right? Which is a very, very famous, rock, a red rock. But this red rock is the core center of the values or system of the Aboriginal population that lives around. But there is nothing built there. It's just that they associate values, spiritual, in this case, spiritual values, to the features. And at the same time, the same concept can be used for artifacts that are European origin, moderns, and so on, like they have in Tasmania, or for the convicts, or in Melbourne for the expos. I mean, things that have been described in the World Heritage. So I think the Burra Charter is very good. It's very, very advanced, because in a way finds a kind of a solution to the dilemma that was opened by the Nara Charter. Sorry to be so long, but the historical balance is built on these things. It is built on these ideas that values belong to society. They don't belong to the stones, they belong to the people, and that you cannot preserve an area, an urban environment, or even a monument, let's say an urban environment, without associating the social values to it. So there is a complete integration between the two. And this, in a way, is the real challenge, because, in the processes that we will see, it has been always much easier to preserve the stones than to preserve the people, for many reasons. One of them is, easy to understand. Cities are, live longer than people. So we all live in cities that were not built by our generation, or built many generations ago, and sometimes even centuries ago. And so we adapt ourselves to the space, to the space that we inherit. We adjust and modify the space that we inherit. Societies changes much faster, and on top, we are now in a situation in this century where global economic processes have given an enormous acceleration to social changes, social and economic changes. So things that in the past could be seen as lasting for decades, or economic structure that would last for long. Now they are very volatile. I think you can see it also in your own environment. Migrations, economic changes. I mean, just think of tourism. Tourism is a very recent phenomenon in the world. Of course, there have always been the elite that was touring the world, but it's only in the past maybe, let's say, I give it a long shot, 50 years, even less. And if you talk about mass tourism, it's less, because mass tourism only comes with low-cost airlines and Airbnb, this kind of thing, only very recent phenomena, 20, 30 years maximum. Right? But tourism, it's a gigantic, colossal agent of change in cities. Now we know that, because it tends to replace pre-existing uses of historic places, and very quickly replaces the existing population. So the tourist historic city that has been studied as a phenomenon, it's also a case that we have to look very, very carefully, because it shows exactly what I'm saying. Changes are very, very fast, and to manage these changes requires a lot of attention. And perhaps I would dare saying that the historical balance recommendation is an attempt to meet this challenge. Okay, but at the same time, because I'm looking at foundations of HUL, let's also look at how the historic city has become a heritage. Because it's not something so long. I keep saying city has been heritage since 50 years. Before it was not. Before it was not heritage, and in many parts of the world, it's not even now. I had always long discussions with my Indian friends. India is a big country, and has huge, very important urban heritage. Cities of India, as you know, are historically very important, and by the way, still relatively preserved, not because of maybe a policy, but because of situation, economic lags, and these kind of things. But if you go to India, nobody believes that cities are heritage. Actually, they do now, because there was a first inscription of an Indian site. I'm very happy, because I struggled for 15 years to get it, which is
Ahmedabad.
But it's one city, in a country of 1.3 billion people. That's one city only. And we hope it's not the last, of course. But I remember very well when we did the meetings, many meetings to have. We want within the Modern Heritage Program, which is a parallel system to the HUL, we wanted to propose the inscription of Chandigarh. Because Chandigarh is, of course, it's a modern city, but it's very coherent as a complex and so on. And so we actually did two conferences there to convince them. I was speaking to the lieutenant governor, which is not representative of the governor. He was saying, why you want to scrap the city? City is not heritage. City is not heritage, but by definition, it cannot be heritage. The Indian concept is essentially monumental, and because their institutions come from a colonial past. They are called the Archaeological Survey, because the British, when they were there, they were interested in the archaeology, and so they created the Archaeological Survey. The Archaeological Survey deals with archaeology monuments. That's it. There are no cities. Also, cities are more complicated because of political processes, different agents and actors, and so on. So that, just to make it very simple. But we had the same problem in Europe. But in the 1960s, finally, a important consciousness came about. I think it started maybe Italy, France, Great Britain, a little bit of Spain, because those countries had a lot of interesting historic area. And of course, this is one case. I'm not saying that it was the dominant one, but with the destruction of this very important market, which was located in the heart of Paris, in 1965, and the construction of a modern horror, because it's really very, very, and it's so bad that they had to redesign it completely just a few years ago to somehow correct this dramatic historical mistake of destroying the market, which could have been very easily, restored and turned into a very important center. You can see it's also very beautiful. So at that time, a conference came about, and the minister, French minister, famous Marot, pushed for a new legislation. This is the first one, national legislation, that somehow facilitates the conservation of historic areas. Now, this legislation, somehow establishes the principle, the basic principle. Essentially, you create a district. You see, this is one city in France, HUL. You created this, you really trace a perimeter on a map, and you define historical, everything that's inside. And what's outside is not historical. And then inside, you operate a certain number of mechanisms, which are either financial, fiscal, or normative, in order to preserve the historic fabric. I mean, this mechanism is the one that is used everywhere in the world. It's not and by the way, the World Heritage Convention has the same idea. It's a core zone of a site. And then maybe sometimes you put a buffer zone to protect views and everything, but essentially the core zone is what matters. So you define this district and you operate. And it was very successful. In fact, I would say that most cities in Europe most historic cities have been preserved to this very simple mechanism, which of course involves interest by the central government and money and so on, but not really big money. Also, it's repaid very easily by land values that come up and so on, these kind of things. The economics has been very very positive in this kind of, but and you find it everywhere. For instance, this is Ahmedabad, which is, of course, you can see the perimeter of the city. And if I think it's again important because you can see the fabric is not particularly extraordinary. It's like, but it has history and a relationship with the monumental aspects of the city. And you find it, I would say, you find it everywhere in the world. Very likely also in Indonesia. I'm sure you have the same thing. At least in my visits, I remember to have the same concept, and because it's a very good concept, it works. But it has a little problem, and we will see it in a minute. That by defining this as a district, you create a difference between areas that are contiguous and sometimes not very different in times, and in a way, this policy has prepared. Was an unexpected result, but sometimes unexpected are very important. Has prepared a fantastic meal for the tourist industry, which with zero investment found a perfect area for their industry. So in fact, it's very fun. We have spent a lot of efforts and public resources and so on to create to conserve a heritage that we thought was very important for the image, for the society, for the national identity, local identity, and so on, and culture, and so it was a cultural approach. And the result was that we somehow gave it to the tourist industry, for the use. And of course, the tourist industry totally, altered the economic and social dimensions of the cities. And I'm noticing that because I think it's, sometimes things that look very good can lead, in a way that are unforeseen to results that are not wanted. Nobody wants a historic city just to be, a market for the tourists, but they are, and large part. So then, well, the convention came. That's another foundation of, so we had the policies and then the convention came and somehow enshrined this idea that there are, in the convention, there are 1,121 sites at the moment. Out of this, about 3/4, 850 are culture. Out of these 850, 300 are cities. Now it's very strange, and I find it a very surprising thing, because cities, as you have heard, our heritage since very, very short time. Archaeology is there for centuries. There are monuments, centuries. Cities, very, very few decades. So how come that this, which was the last category to come into the game, became the first in the World Heritage Convention? Well, I have an answer. Maybe you have others, but I have an answer which is very simple. Cities have a mayor, and the mayor wants to promote the city and its political process, and so he mobilizes the national interest and so on. And so they have an actor very active that wants to put the city in the list because of prestige and so on. And archaeological areas do not have mayors or etc. So I think it's very easy to explain politically, right? But let's say the result is, in fact, is another one. We have now defined historic city as the most important category of heritage in the world, and you have it everywhere. Europe, of course, dominates because the model was European, but you find it everywhere. It's the Arab world, it's the Rabat, very, very interesting, a recent description. Timbuktu, Mali, it's a completely different model of city, but it exists. The famous Cusco, where you can see the two civilizations, the Inca and the Spanish mixing. Kyoto, which is beautiful with the temples and fabric, not so well preserved, but it's still visible. Of course, the Medabat, we come back to Medabat all the time. So every region has one, and I think it's almost a sector of study and research in itself. To take urban areas that are inscribed in the World Heritage. But what's the consequence of having 300 cities? Well, the result is that because cities, as I said at the very beginning, are very fragile, very exposed, very threatened, and so on, the result is that we had an enormous flow of discussions at the committee. This is also modern cities out there, like Brasilia, because now there is a great vulnerability of urban fabric. Look at this picture. Look at this picture. This is Kathmandu, 1970, where you can see complete coherence between the monuments, which are here. Now you see the monuments, the very famous temples and so on, and the urban fabric, which accompanies that. This is 1970. 30 years later, that's the Kathmandu. So total, complete, savage, I would say, eradication of the urban fabric. Of course, the monuments themselves are protected. Unfortunately, now Kathmandu, as you know, had a big earthquake, so now they suffered a lot. But the monuments are preserved, but not the rest. So you go to Kathmandu, and it's a bit shocking to see this. Even the authority, they keep saying, well, we protect only the monument, we cannot protect the rest. So there's been zero policy for protecting even the immediate surrounding. Now you'll find these kind of things are in front of the temple. You see the temple is right here. I'm inside the temple. I'm taking this picture. So it's a disaster from a conservation point of view. But this happens everywhere. I've seen it. Well, most of Central Asia is like this. Well, of course, Asia, but China, let's not even mention. It's completely vaporized. Vaporized their historic heritage. India, not so much, but just because they are lagging behind in terms of economics. But now there are big challenges, for instance, for conservation of some of the last remnants of colonial city like Yangon or so. But very difficult. It's very difficult to say. You find a little better, of course, as I said, in Europe because of those regulations, but already in North America, very little, very few. Of course, we have New Orleans and Charleston, but there are cases. Mexico is a little better. Mexico and Latin America is a little better, but again, because they came a little later. Now, in cities that had very fast growth process, like Sao Paulo, for instance, now the situation is totally different. There's nothing left. So big issue is the urban fabric. And this is, for instance, another case that we have studied. It's a World Heritage site called Zabid. It's on the Red Sea coast of Yemen, and beautiful, of course, mosques and very traditional heavy. Like this is the reality today. That's it. So what you see, in the previous picture, is gradually destroyed and replaced by concrete buildings and very poor, as you can see, kind of architecture. Then the urban landscape. Of course, this is called the historic urban landscape, but doesn't mean only the landscape, but of course, the urban landscape, meaning the skyline, is very important. But we show this picture of the Tower of London. This is World Heritage site, and it's a very important historical piece. First, a Roman fortress, the Roman invasion with Julius Caesar, and then became a medieval fortress and is the symbol of the country. But in reality, the situation of this monument is this one. That's, it's right in the middle of a booming commercial district, which in a way, as you can see, almost obliterates the monument per se. So, and this is in a city which is the first city that had passed a law to protect the views of the monuments. But the results are really not very good. There is a law to protect, for instance, the views of St. Paul's Cathedral, which is very important, of course. And even so, I mean, you go to London, it's hard to spot the cathedral anymore because it's surrounded by things. So the views and the landscape in terms of skyline and sometimes roofscape also of the city is so important. It's a case of another case, for instance, in Kiev, in the Lavra Monastery, super important for Orthodox, and as you can see, beautiful Baroque and so on. But that's the situation today, with all skyscrapers pushing, pulling, coming up here and there. And then we have the iconic architectures. This is a very famous alien. It's called the Alien. This building. This is by Peter Cook, a famous architect of the Archizoom. Of course, it's an interesting architect, but I really would like to understand why they had the guts of doing this kind of insertion. It's something that it's hard to explain, because it doesn't. But even at least here, you have some attempt to do an architectural object. But in many cases, you don't. This is the center of the Santiago del Chile in Chile, capital of Chile. The cathedral, so the most important religious building of the most important square in the most important city in the country. Look at what they've done. How can you have this poor architecture springing up next to that? It's very clearly there's no control of any fort. So these kind of things are very important. Architecture plays a role, very important. And as you will see, there are some good examples also. Then infrastructure. This is another disaster that sometimes happens because infrastructure are pushed by the dominance of the car and so on. Like this is the historic center of Genoa, for instance. You can see there is a freeway that separates the historic harbor from the city. And Istanbul, we had a big problem with this bridge because it's very close to the mosques, and also it somehow competes with the vertical nature of minarets and so on. By the way, I don't find it particularly well designed, but that's a different story. And this is Panama, another World Heritage City in Central America, where they had this fantastic idea of creating a freeway all around the historic city, but destroying essentially the historic city. It's really crazy. But anyway, so you see, these are all government policies, government decisions, government policies, and money and so on. So it's not something that comes out of the blue or from the market. This is the government. Then you have gentrification, which of course is the substitution of the traditional population, and it's another big problem. I think you have it everywhere in the world. Certainly in Europe and North America, we had enormous. There's been a total change on that, and a transformation of these places. They have an historical value, and they played a historical role in the cities and so on, into a kind of a place for the rich, essentially. Tourism, as I said, big transformer because of the enormous mass of resources, people, consumption that they generate. This is my city, they have this fantastic idea of bringing these big ships next to the monuments, and you can see there's a big discussion around this. And I think hopefully recently the government said, okay, let's move them somewhere else, because it's not really possible. Also, some of them are dangerous. There was some accident also. One ship lost control and almost hit the monument. That's really very, very complicated. But tourism is so powerful that it can do everything. And the money that is behind goes everywhere, and so no mayor can resist. It's very difficult. So you really need to have a strong organized society, to back, and to counter this process. And of course, conflicts that have been marking our, life in the past decades, like Mostar or Brovnik or Timbuktu. I don't mention all of them because it would take us far away, but there really is a big problem there. So you see, these are big things. So when when we started looking at HUL, we realized that we had to find ways in which, at least provide, the professional and the committee, the World Heritage Committee, with some mechanism to have a better understanding and perhaps even a better response to this issue. But the first thing we noticed that, we cannot treat the historic city as a fixed concept. It's something that is changing. And this is, I think, one characteristic of the historical landscape. It's a transformative concept. It's an approach. It's not a concept. It's not a charter. It's an approach, because it adapts to different localities, adapts to times and so on. And, I can't wait for the moment in which the recommendation will be changed. That will be a great moment, because it's exactly what we want, to somehow have this text accompanying the changes that come along in transformation that come along in the urban scene. And they will come with a strong development of migrations and changes in the metropolization of the world. You will have this change. There was an architect in Britain, very intelligent guy called Cedric Price, and he had this very nice cartoon, I would say, which was defining the city as an egg, because you have the ancient city, which is surrounded by a wall with its core here, and then the modern city, or relatively modern, with its historic area, but then all the peripheries, the fried egg, and then the scrambled egg is the modern city. Looks like a Chinese soup where you have a combination of old and new, and just a joke, but I think it's just to show that when we talk about heritage and urban heritage in particular, we can't take a fixed concept. And unfortunately, the concept that is operated today by the World Heritage Convention and by many policies is this one. City is like a district. It's it's normally inside a wall. Or the wall could be a real wall, like a medieval wall or so on, or maybe just some freeways or modern walls. So evolution and transition. And the first thing we thought was very important for the HUL was to redefine the issue of the definition of historic. Remember the district issue. This is the city of Bologna, in Italy, which is, as you can see, surrounded by a wall. This wall doesn't exist anymore, but has been demolished, but is the trace of the historic wall, and now there are boulevards, all around. When they started doing the first conservation plans in the 1960s, which were very important and almost prototypic of urban conservation, they took this as a historic center, so it was the center inside the thing. But in the 10 years ago, the city did a new master plan, and they thought that this idea of having a kind of a top-down definition of historic heritage was not good, or not good enough, and so they started reverting the process, and they said, well, let's ask the population. So they had a long consultation with the population, and what came out was very interesting, because now the historic city of Bologna is this one. So it's actually the old historic city, but they added a number of areas that were built later on, 18th, 19th century, even 20th century. This one that you see is actually a 20th century housing complex that was done, even part of it after World War II. But the inhabitants said that they had historic values that needed to be preserved, so they added it. I think it's a very interesting result. This is a kind of a combination of top-down and bottom-up historic definition of a city, and I really encourage that very much. But it requires a lot of work with the population to really, understand and collect the values that they associate to historic heritage. This is a case that we are looking at in Shanghai. It's a creek, Hoku Creek. We really go there, and it's like a low cost housing in the 1920s and so nothing really shining. But then you start studying it, you understand there were very interesting typologies. that the relation with the creek and the thing was studied very well there, monumental area. So in fact, we couldn't define this as a historic heritage, and because as I said earlier, China doesn't have many because they leveled everything. This becomes an important case, and I hope that one day you'll do the same thing in your own city, which is so important and so beautiful and rich in terms of heritage. Now, of course, HUL you know very well because you studied it in different processes. So let me go very quickly on what were the main conceptual elements. First of all, we looked at layers, very important. Layers is not just archaeology, although in many cities like Athens, for instance, obviously there is a big archaeology where the city has been there for 3,000 years. But even London is trying to show, its own layer, historical layers. A museum of the Roman London, for instance. I think it's important to look at city as a layer process because it is. Every city is an archaeology, even if it's a recent city. And these layers are very important to understand not only how the city came about, but also how to preserve it. Because each layer has a message. Now it's like a kind of a time capsule, of values, experiences, and models, and so on that we have to understand. It's difficult. Sometimes we don't have all the tools, but really, this is the key point. If you don't understand the city as a layer process, you cannot preserve it. It's or you make some fake kind of conservation processes. I would always stress the need of looking at geology because a city, 90% of cities that exist are made up with things that materials that come from the geology. This is the case of Rome, for instance. Look at Rome of course, these are the ruins of Rome, but you see, this shows how all the different pieces of the city are come from different stones that are found here and there. And I'm sure that, of course, now with modern industrial buildings, this doesn't exist anymore. All of them are made up of concrete, steel, and glass. But until very recent, and in many parts of the world, as of today, you can only understand the city if you know its geology, because they understand how the basic material existence of the city is actually derived from the earth. And then, of course, the ecology. This is a very interesting project, which I recommend also. It's called Mannahatta, which is the Indian name of Manhattan. And they did a study, 10 years research on the ecology of New York and what's underneath New York, something you never see, right? But there are rivers and lakes and ecologies, animals, life, of course, because every city is sitting on an ecology. And we totally disregard this thing, and we very often they make a lot of mistakes because we don't understand what's the ecology, the hydrology, the geology of a city. So this is very much pushed in the connection with the natural environment. This is not a particularly new idea, and this in the planning profession. This appeared in the 1960s with Ian McHarg, for instance, Building with Nature, and many other things. So I'm not saying that these are discoveries. We're not discovering the world. We are just creating a package where things make sense. The typologies I mentioned earlier, the Italians were very good at inventing this methodology of looking at the building typologies, again, the center of Bologna. But now it's very much used everywhere. These abacuses are built, to understand how a city is made, like disassembled pieces of the city, understand how the different building types have been produced along in the different moments of the life of the city. You can apply it everywhere, even into modern metropolis. And then, of course, the visual relationships. Now, I mentioned earlier Kyoto, for instance. Kyoto has been quite precursive, I would say, in terms of defining this thing, because there is, as you know, a spiritual relationship between the temples and the surrounding hills. So at some point, the Japanese became worried that because of construction, this physical relationship, visual relationship could have been hampered. So they started putting up some regulations. So in fact, they were a precursor of regulation for views protection because of this. But they've done quite an interesting thing. I'm saying Kyoto is not particularly well preserved in terms of urban fabric, but they have preserved these relations, which are very, let's call it dense in spiritual values. This is the case of Rio de Janeiro, not another city that is not particularly well preserved historically, but all the key landscape relationship are preserved. And in fact, it was described in the World Heritage List as probably the first urban landscape. You see the area that are inscribed under inside the red line. They're essentially the natural areas, the forest, the botanical garden, the water area of the bay, and so on. But then the city becomes a buffer zone for this in a way. And then, of course, engaging the communities and all forms. I mean, this is just go very quickly because it's very obvious. We also need to put a lot of effort, a lot of attention on this area, this issue of memory. I know it's a very difficult one, sometimes politically also difficult, but a city, because it's a long historical shot, I mean, it has a lot of memory, things that happen, events, sometimes unpleasant, passage of communities or individuals and so on. All this is part of the city conservation process. It cannot just be denied. So, and sometimes you have to even to trace it back. Now there is a big effort in Europe to put all these little stones, for remembering victims of the Holocaust, but you can do for many other things, And there is a big case that I want to show you, that is the destruction of the Twin Towers in New York, which generated, a really amazing memorial, which is this museum of the Twin Towers, which is fantastic architecture, by the way, and very impressive, because you are in the middle of the city, right in the middle. It's a huge lot, as this is not a small thing in terms of, and it's really dedicated to that catastrophe and attack in a way that will remain as a memorial of New York for centuries. So, memory is a dimension, extremely important dimension of urban conservation, and because it's really forgotten by the planners. It's not really put up front. I want to stress it. And then, of course, the intangible values. Every city has places, public spaces where things happen, and so on. And of course, this is, by the way, it's the only square that is inscribed both in the World Heritage List and the Intangible Heritage List. So, Jamatna in Marrakesh, and Siena, very famous. But the economy is super important. It's again another thing that doesn't belong to the culture of our bidimensional zoning planning, but this is very important. So to find ways in which you define activities that are compatible with it, and urban creativity. Sometimes conservators are seen as deniers. They're against modern things and contemporary action. No, I think we should be open to that. Both in terms of art and in terms of architecture. Now, this, for instance, is a good case. I mentioned that there are also good architecture for historic areas, and they are here in Nîmes in France, and this is a work by Foster, actually, which he had very difficult task of building something next to a Roman, one of the few completely preserved Roman temples that exist in the country. I think he did it very, very, very well. This is another one, the Renzo Piano in Genoa, for instance, where he used these beams that are typical of a harbor kind of thing to create a sculpture. Okay, so we are here, and I think the system of HUL, which is the methodology. Again, not particularly innovative. We are using classical, I would say, methodological frameworks, map resources, reach consensus, assess vulnerability, and integrate that and prioritize the actions and so on. So HUL, as you see, is a derivative of issues that were discussed at the World Heritage Committee, and say processes that have been experimented in different parts of the world, both in terms of conservation of cities and in terms of also new approaches that somehow push this greater role of civil society in the definition of urban values. So we want to say it's a combination. It cannot be only just top down, it can only be the experts that come and say what a city is, but also you have to listen, perhaps give value to and predominance also to the civil society. Now, we are in an urban world. Sita, I think I will take a little bit longer than you. I don't know if you can
Take your time,
Yeah,
Francesco, no worry
I
about it.
will take about 10 more minutes of talk, and then we have
Fine.
but
Yeah.
I can stay longer. There, no problem.
You know, we
also,
are not fast. Most of us is fasting, so it's time to wait for broke our fasting.
because in Ramadan it's true. I'm so sorry.
Okay, so it's okay.
Okay, now all this that we said has to fit the big picture. There's no way we can think that we are out of the picture. Now, sometimes this has been a mistake, in a way, by planners of urban conservation to look only at the small picture, and then the big picture somehow overcame the small picture, so we are lost. So we have to look at the big. So there's no way, and I really insist that HUL can be separated from processes that have a global impact and will have global impact. So that's why I'm saying it's very important to look outside. And if I can say, if there is a follow-up of the urban historical urban landscape activity that we are trying to promote, is essentially looking at this thing. In fact, as I will show you later on, we have launched a project, and we would like to associate you also to this project, which is called Heritage and the Metropolis, which tries exactly to understand what will be the role, function, even definition. What will be heritage in the next in the century, especially in large metropolitan areas that somehow defy the concept of urban heritage, because they look like totally the opposite. But we want to explore this, and we have selected 12 big metropolis, and we're starting that. But if you want to be associated, you will be welcome, because I think it's important to have also experiences from your part of the world, because you're here, right? Yeah, you're this big dot here, this Jakarta thing. Now, the urban world, as I said, sorry, earlier, somehow found its representation in the Sustainable Development Goals. You will find urban dimensions everywhere, because of course, urban has to do with poverty, with hunger, with quality, with education, with gender. All the issues of the world are in the city. But there is, as you can see, one piece which is specific, and I think it was very successful to have cities represented as one of the key pole of interest of global policies. So goal 11 is dedicated to cities, and luckily enough, we were able to also put our own little things inside that 11. I'll show you later on. So we are represented, culture and cultural heritage is represented there too. This is the goal, makes cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Now, these four words, very important, and you find it always all the time. But there is one of the goals, one of the targets, actually, it's called, which is strengthening, have to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. Okay, they didn't know where to put it, and they put it there, but I think it makes sense, because although cultural and natural heritage might be also outside of cities, but it makes sense because, again, cities are the dominant actors in the field of conservation. So habitat, I mentioned earlier, and now the challenge is that habitat try to focus on are very well known. I'm not saying anything specific, but essentially they are represented in these images. This is the inequality, great inequality that exists, and sometimes physically visible in the urban context. I look at this picture of, I think it's Mumbai, where you can see immediately, the different social classes, that are living in the same next to each other. Then you have housing conditions. Housing remains, in spite of the fact of having 60 years of work, because the first conference, Habitat 76, dealt with this issue of housing and slums and so on. But housing conditions are really, and especially even in historic areas, this is the Casbah of Algiers, which is a World Heritage Site, by the way. But the housing condition in these places are really dramatic, and so, not to mention the fact that, as you will see later, slums are even bigger now than they used to be, in spite of many efforts. this crowding and health. This is not a graphic, and this is a picture of a building in Hong Kong, where you can see, now especially now with COVID crisis and so on, it's very difficult to manage, health in situations like that. Social inclusion or exclusion, which is another big issue, and something that it's becoming a big issue in cities where they become more and more segregated. Instead of being more integrated, we have more segregation. Services and like transportation or other services in general, and of course the environmental quality of this Dhaka, and where you can see what happens in a big city if there is no environmental control of it. So all these things are linked to one simple line. This is the urbanization process in the world. There were 33% 1960 of people living in cities in the world, and they are now 56. I think this line is very interesting because you see, from 1960 to today, about 60 years, many things happen in terms of economics, in terms of politics, in terms of the social conflict, everything. And the line is straight. There is no deflection, not moment in which the line changed direction. And so we can say reasonably that it will go on with the same line in the next 30 years. So we can very easily see that the next assessment, 2050, where already is predicted between 66, but some people say 70. And this somehow switches completely the ratio between rural and urban. I think these are maxi processes that affects our lives today, and certainly will affect your lives tomorrow. There is a great difference, of course, in the world. Some countries are less urbanized. Obviously, you see the difference in 2014, 2050. So these are the areas that will in 2050 will have more than 75% of urban population, others less. But obviously, because the world is different. This is the population today. It's about 7 billion, but out of 7 billion, 4.5 are in Asia. So this is where the people are, and then 1.2 in Africa, but then the rest are smaller. North America, Europe, maybe make a total of 1 billion out of 7. So the big issues are here, where you are actually, and therefore the concentration of issues and problems will be there mostly. I would say mostly Asia and Africa. These are the two continents that will see great changes in the coming, say, 30 years because of urbanization. And so perhaps Asia is more equipped, a little bit more equipped than Africa to face this. But because of the enormous demographic pressure that is coming about in both continents, you will see a lot of dramatic changes. We have to watch these two. These are the two frontiers. Of course, also in Latin America, but less significant because the numbers are less. Just the sheer numbers are there. 4.5 billion people in Asia. Why people are going to cities? Well, it's very easy to answer, because that's where the money is. And that's where you find more opportunities for jobs, for life. And also the cities are now super powerful, in terms of GDP. The gross domestic product is produced in cities everywhere in the world. So I mean, it's like a magnet, that attracts more and more. The bigger it becomes, the more it attracts. And by the way, it's explained. This is the curve, very interesting curve that shows the relation between poverty and rate of urbanization. You see, there is a complete relationship and very direct. The higher urbanization, and the lower is the poverty. So it's very easy to explain why this is happening. Well, of course, we're talking about deurbanization, shrinking cities, but these are smaller phenomena. They're really not dominant phenomena. They are important in certain areas, but not globally. Globally, we will have this in the next 30 years. We will have another push, and accelerated, I would say, also in certain continents, towards metropolitan concentration. This is the another interesting chart. This is the number of millions of people out of poverty from 1992 to today, right? So every year you see this is 23 million, 16 million, 34 million less people in poverty, which of course is defined at a certain threshold. So in the past 30 years, uninterruptedly, maybe with a little crisis in Asia and financial crisis, almost uninterruptedly, you had a decline of poverty thanks to essential urbanization. Except last year, this I come back to the issue of COVID. COVID has been like a hammer that has smashed the toy that was so well working, smashed completely the mechanism, and has somehow reverted it back many years. So when you have hundreds of millions of people that are back into poverty because of that, because of the crisis of economic, because of jobs, because of lack of tourism, because of lack of opportunities, this is really serious. So that's why I'm saying let's watch it. Let's hope that this will continue. But there is a risk there, in the process. So all I'm saying, I keep saying, all I'm saying has to be checked against the COVID, because the COVID is a game changer. Slums are increasing, and this is another drama. It means that the mechanism that governments and local governments and international agencies, World Bank, blah blah, have put in place to counter the expansion of slums have not been in pace with the migration, and we have now we have again a big slum problem like we had in the 1970s, and it's very serious. And this is another big issue. Okay, so 11. This is the 11. Let's have I'm not going to go in detail, but because you probably know this one. But if you don't know it, have a look at goal 11, which looks, of course, at housing, transport, and sustainable urbanization. And then, of course, 11.4 we had seen, and that sets all the goals, to essentially relieve, diminish the number of deaths, protect the environment, create public spaces. It's like a catalog of objectives that have to do with our profession, urban planners and urban managers, create, reduce inclusions and so on. So this is an interesting roadmap that I suggest can be used also for historic areas, because in a way, it's like a catalog of things that we need to achieve. and although they refer to a broader context, I think we have to apply it to our more limited areas, the historic areas, to see whether we are in line with the thing. So take it as a kind of it's a roadmap. It's a guidance of on policies and also on monitoring systems for historic areas. These are the 4 pillars of the urban agenda. Very simple and but again, we can apply it very simply to our system. And of course, I'm not going to go into detail, but please take the urban agenda of Habitat, which is on the web. You can download it and look at what they want to do. Because what comes out of that agenda is really it's a catalog, it's a manual of urban policies and urban management, and we then can derive out of these many elements that we can apply to the process of preservation of historic fabric. And again, not to be disjointed. We're not separated from the rest of the world. We are inside the world, and we are influenced positively and negatively by what happens in the world. So we have to know what happens in the world. We have to follow also what the rest of the world's policies are recommending for urban management. Okay, this is in fact what we wanted to do with this document. I go very quickly and we close on this, and we open up a discussion. But Culture, Urban, Future, again, you can download it for free, and it's 2 years of intensive work. Essentially 2 points. We try to, first of all, we try to assess what urban heritage is in the world. And funny enough, because I'm also an academic, I was very surprised to see that there was no academic study, no global academic study of urban heritage. Very funny, huh? I mean, academics do everything. So if you look at it, in a library, you find everything. And of course, if you take other areas of interest for conservation, for instance, monuments or archaeology, you find comparative studies that look at the thing globally. Nothing in urban areas. Very strange. So we said, okay, let's do it. And we did it. So this is the first ever global study on urban heritage that exists. It was done, it took a long time. It was done by eight teams, by the way, in different parts of the world. So to collect all this information and put it together was something. That's why the study, the preparation of this document took about a couple of years. But I think it was worth. And now, if you look at this, that's why I'm saying this is like a textbook, because this is again first and only existing global study on urban heritage. If you look at this, you will understand, the different origins, different shapes, different nature of urban heritage in the world. And one thing that comes up very clearly, and I'm not surprised because I think I knew it before, but it's good to have a confirmation. It's complete diversity, the complete diversity of urban heritage, and the absurdity of imposing one single model for the conservation of urban heritage. I think we made a clear demonstration of that, and therefore I think the historical balance, which is very flexible on this and accept diversity as a dimension, it's an important progress, because if you apply only Eurocentric views, you're not going to go anywhere. In fact, if you apply Eurocentric views to urban heritage, everybody's wrong. The world is wrong, and of course I cannot accept this as a conclusion. So let's use constructively this finding, this demonstration that diversity is the dominant feature in the thing, and let's avoid using preconceptual models that lead you only to frustration and to this somehow unjustifiable conclusion that the world is wrong. And then the second part of the report is actually identification of policies, policies that have a cultural content that somehow build on the urban heritage as an important feature of cities in order to drive certain to reach certain objectives. This is very much linked to the urban agenda. In fact, we gave it to Habitat, and part of it has been incorporated. And if you look at the urban agenda, you will find these elements scattered here and there, but this is much more coherent as a package. And so we have 1, 2, 3 policy, people, environment, and policies. For people, of course, we looked at 4 elements, which are essentially the create cities that are livable, human-centered, and of course the cultural dimension, as you can imagine, is very important. Inclusivity, social, relationship between different communities and so on. Peaceful tolerance, somehow creating context in which you can promote this kind of social relation, which are not easy, and to especially in a world where migration is a very important process. And then of course the creativity, because the cities are typically the place for innovation and design and creative process. Second one is the environment, again, human scale, cities that are not environmentally destructive. So of course we somehow lean more on the idea of having cities that are more compact than dispersed because of energy consumption and the rest. Inclusive the resilience of cities, and of course in terms of nature and other things that were mentioned earlier in relationship with nature. The public space, quality of public spaces and urban identities and so on. So this is all clearly identified in that part. And third is the policies, of course, sustainability of local government, this relationship with the rural, urban-rural, which again has been severed many times. So I think we need to recuperate some of this idea, because there are a lot of cultural exchanges between the two. and improving governance and financing. So there is a whole package. Now, this is very synthetic, but I'm showing, but it's very expanded with essays and so on. So it's actually quite a elaborate document. It's more than just a list of things. So it's actually more and more. So in this sense, it could be an interesting reading for you. So of course, I looked also, we looked also in this case of UNESCO's activity in cities, but this may be less interesting for you. But we also realized that UNESCO is actually quite active in cities. For heritage, the Creative Cities Network, it's very important. The Coalition for Inclusive Cities, like a more social kind of thing. The Learning Cities, the educational, the Man of the Biosphere, the environmental, the disaster, and the water and system. So there are a lot of it, but I'm not surprised because, in fact, as I said at the very beginning, cities are the core of every action. You can't address global issues unless you deal with cities. So actually, we stress the fact that cities should be much more on the forefront of global policy than they are today. We also, and I put it here because it's an interesting piece. This I would consider almost a follow-up of HUL. This is a document that we did with the World Bank, pushed by the fact that there were in recent times, there were many distractions, some linked to conflicts, but also to disasters. So we did this report, which is a position paper on city reconstruction and recovery. Again, you can cure, it's called the CURE framework, culture and reconstruction. You can download it from the web for free and have a look. This is really, I think, an offspring of all these things that we are discussing. But very much in a completely different spirit, because the World Bank is a bank, so they have to look at investments and processes management. But you will find a lot of elements that are linked to this cultural approach to urban conservation and urban management that is at the core of the HUL. Now, and I close, we need to look at the future of HUL. And as I said earlier, of course, there is by the way, there is a report also, you can download it. This is more than 2 years ago, it was like an assessment of the first 8 years of HUL. But it's very, let's say, not bureaucratic, but more like it was like a questionnaire to member states, who uses it and so on. But just to see where we stand, it's not bad. I mean, I think there were almost 50 states replied, so it looks like gradually things are getting off the ground, and it's I was quite satisfied with this results. Of course, changing urban regulation is very complex. It takes a long time. It has to percolate from the national to the local level. But overall, I think we intercepted a trend. So even if it's not called HUL, they do the same thing, which is okay. The only element that has not yet been modernized in urban by the historical urban landscape is the very World Heritage Convention, which still talks about groups of buildings. It's still there, and I'm really obsessed by this because I find it unacceptable. But the issue that we are looking at today is more the issue of scale. Because very often the conservation tools that we do for historical urban ensembles are limited to very small areas. They work very well in a village, like this Miao village in southern China, but the reality is different. We have a metropolis. So that's what I was saying earlier on. We have launched a project which tries to intercept this or define this relationship between heritage and the metropolis, especially looking at the fact that that we will have a lot of metropolitan development in the coming decades, and the multiplication of number of cities. You see the cities in blue are the ones that exist, but the mega city, but the ones that in purple are the ones that will come up, and you see where the concentration is. I don't have to explain why. This is where the population is in the world, but you're here. So we are launching this project, which takes in consideration cities that have a big say heritage story, and even processes of control and management, etc., and their identity is linked to that. Others that maybe have lost it a little bit, like Sao Paulo or many others, and others that perhaps don't even know they have it, because this is a city, Shenzhen, that is only 40 years old. So it literally didn't exist 40 years ago, but today it's 16 million people, so it's big. And to tell a city like this, a metropolis like this, that they don't have any heritage, I don't find it acceptable. I think we are wrong if we say that. We have to understand it different, maybe redefine our concept of heritage, unpack the concept, and try to see how this enters into this new world of metropolitan systems. So if Indonesia wants to be, and we will be very happy to have you on board, because of course you have one mega city, Jakarta, but also other cities like Georgia. It could be an interesting case to look at. So it's a clear, open invitation to take part in this process that we're launching now. We will have a first workshop in Seoul at the end of the year in December, which will, preparatory essentially, and mostly virtual, so it's very easy to attend. And then, a year later, we will bring more results again in another process, in another conference in Seoul. But again, this is a long and large process that invests, really a global situation. We do it with Habitat, with the agency, so it's really becoming a big thing, and we'd love to have you there. So I think if you want to enter into this kind of processes, you're welcome. You will be welcome to come. Okay, I'll stop here for this. Although there are many other things that I would like to say, but anyway, maybe I should say one more thing, just as a compliment, that we also have launched this new organization, which is called Our World Heritage. This is the idea is to have a civil society group that deals with this thing, but because the World Heritage is global, so the group has to be global. So we created a global organization, an international NGO, which essentially promotes the role of civil society in the World Heritage processes at all levels, both in the central level, UNESCO, but also locally, and wants to bring the voice of civil society much higher, because so far it's not been there. The World Heritage Convention is very institutional, very state party oriented, and of course the advisory bodies, ICOMOS, play a role, but they are all also under the cap of an international treaty, which by definition is managed by states. But as I keep saying to those who say, but this is a state affair. No, yes, but it's true. But states do not exist per se. They exist for the society. So I think we want to be heard. So now this Our Heritage is launched this year, a mega system of events, which you find in our World Heritage website. And we have selected 12 issues which we think are critical, and we have assigned one issue per month. And so we are already in the 4th month of the year. First month we did the impact of information technology on heritage. Then we looked at tourism. Then last month we looked at gender and diversity issues. This month is the human rights month, and go on. And next month will be I think June will be the urban months. So when I mention that, because actually these are the 12 issues. We put it under this term, new heritage approaches, but that's where we're going to discuss the future of HUL and many things. And I really think that because it's all done virtually and in video, so it's very easy to connect. If you look at the website, you can register, and you will be invited to attend these events, and they are very rich. We have the best experts. It's really a high level global thing in terms of so it's very enriching and very somehow forward looking for students and for professionals. This could be a very interesting way to explore the issues that surround the convention. Then we have one on sustainability, climate change, the places and memory. This is going to be heavy. Conflicts, another heavy one. And then we want to explore the beyond the listening, because we think that the list, the World Heritage list has taken all the attention, but we don't look at other types of heritage or other forms, so we want to, the convention should, because there is an article in the convention that looks at that, but it's been completely forgotten. And then of course last will be the opening up to civil society. So this will be 12 months of exploration, and then next year 2022 we will run a global conference which will bring a platform of reform, what we think should be the reform of the World Heritage Convention. We don't know whether the committee will listen to us, but it's not done just for the committee. I think it's done for a broader audience. So if they want, then we can, of course, we will be very open to bring our, our expertise and results. I mean, this is an enormous consultation. It's a global consultation at a scale that was never done. So, I'm quite happy of this thing, because when we started it, we didn't know, but we realized that there is an enormous community out there in the world that is very interested in and it's made up of people that are, simply interested in heritage and support heritage, like local organizations, and they have professionals, and then you have academics, a lot of academics, all sorts of things. And very quickly this community came together, and now we have a massive thing, which is sometimes a little bit hard to manage, also considering that everything is done at $0. We don't have a penny at the moment, and we just last week established the foundation. It's actually based in the Netherlands. It's a Dutch statute, but it's a foundation that it's called Our Heritage, and it's the one that will manage this and drive this process in the years to come. It's very much open to the youth, and we would like you to register and receive for free our newsletter, so on. So be member of this global effort to somehow elevate the role of citizens, in the management of this very important tool. Well, Sita, this is it for the moment. Let's have a discussion. I know I've put a lot of issues, but I'm sure that maybe this is not the last time we can discuss it. Yeah. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Francesco. This is really something for all of us. You started with the charters, and then now going to the global efforts. And we are very honored that you invite us also to participate on your new global movement. Francesco, there is some questions for you. Is this okay?
Of course, I'm here.
Okay. Yes, I will go directly to the chat, and I will invite, first of all, is Talita. And then Ajeng and Yuni, they are all the students, master students, that right now they are working on how to apply your theory from your books. And silakan, Talita first.
Is my sound clear?
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
I don't see you, but it's okay.
Oh,
dibuka aja, ya bisa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There you are. Talita Liu.
Yeah. So, Mr. Bandarin, Busita, and friends, my name is Lita. Thank you for the chance given. I have been reading your book, HUL, in my first year of master program in UGM. It is well explained, and it helps me to understand better. And from the book, Historic Urban Landscape, I realized that HUL is a place with identity and collective memories of past and present for urban communities. Significance and values is not only for building, but also of culture, in relation to Ruskin's statement that restoration is impossible with only few remnants of destruction, accompanied with false description. Therefore, to make it possible, reliable information is needed, which brought me to some questions being, first, is there any standard or assessment to validate significance, since often significance are for a particular community only? And then secondly, also in relation to social conservation, how to determine if social aspects are successfully conserved? To conclude or state, do we have to reach specific percentage of qualification or parameters numerically, or being present is considered as enough. And then additionally, I saw in the slideshow, in developing cities, aesthetic values are constantly changing like trends, depends on local culture, can be of many perspectives. How to determine design appropriateness? Does it have to resemble past design, or any suggestion? Thank you. That's all my question, and have a pleasant day ahead.
Thank you, Talita.
Okay,
Well, this is big
Francis.
questions. We open up for the world. But let me try to synthesize a little bit, because you know, many of the issues that you are asking for, in fact, are at the core of a long process of elaboration. So I cannot really go into very much detail. But you deal, first of all, you deal with the issue of significance and values. Of course, you mentioned Raskin, but you know, this is really oldish. You know, I think we have gone beyond. These are the precursors. You know, they're the first people that somehow dealt with the issue. But I think we have now better established a better system of understanding values. I think there is in the World Heritage Convention a mechanism which I found. I reflected a lot on that, because it seemed to me a little bit mechanic and a bit dogmatic also. But I think at the end it's good, and I suggest that you look at it. It's the definition of outstanding universal value. Now, outstanding universal value has been criticized by many scholars for being very Eurocentric, because it is the universalistic way that somehow supported the colonialism for centuries. But so let's forget about the title. But essentially, is the definition of the value. So the process of definition of value. This is the key thing. How do we define the value? As you've seen in many of the things that I said earlier, this has been at the center of many discussions. Because the Nara document, the bekerjasama Charter, all are around how and who defines the value. Now, so far, in the classical world, the classical approach, which somehow reflected in the World Heritage Convention, the value is defined by the experts, or sometimes by the politicians. Now, we want to somehow change this process, because if we remain there, then the world will become very, very autocratic, and we will never intercept the real significance of heritage for the population, and therefore we will miss the opportunity of involving the population in the conservation. So that's I don't think any site can be preserved if the population doesn't want to preserve it. This is true even for big monuments. If there is no conviction in the people that this is a value to be preserved. So how do you define value? Well, this has evolved quite a lot, and I think e-commerce has even brought some interesting new features on that. I suggest, if you want to explore more on this, to look at there is a manual for the preparation of World Heritage sites, our heritage nominations, which is downloadable from the UNESCO site for free, and shows how to reach the definition of value. And then e-commerce has produced also, and it's also downloadable materials and guidelines and guides for that. Well, essentially, the definition of values comes in two ways. First of all, you have to somehow identify what they call the attributes, of a value system. So it's not something floating in the air. It has to be anchored to a certain number of things. Now, this not necessarily to be physical. It can also be intangible. So a value, an attribute can be an intangible. So it's very important that it's not just physical. And then out of this, you establish a broader definition of the value, which in a way sustains the overall process. Now, I think it's important to say that today you can't do this operation without involving the society, the communities. Because in the past it was done by the experts. Of course, even one single person can write the value of a site, but what's the value for society? So the consultation process, which is very complex, long, sometimes boring, and sometimes controversial, but it's fundamental. If you don't bring that, people will never appropriate, will never own the thing, you know. And if they don't own the value process, they don't own the heritage, and then therefore they cannot be part of the conservation process. So it's very, very important. So whether it's called outstanding universal value or significance, which is now the Borough Charter terminology, the process is similar. You have to define the attributes, define the overarching value that encompass all the attributes, and then you have to, but in this process you have to involve, you know, a larger group of people. Although this is not exactly the answer to all your questions, I think it summarizes a bit. But I look forward in the future, maybe we're gonna expand it more.
Okay, thank you. Begitu ya, Talita. The next Ajeng Kusuma, silahkan dibuka jendelamu. Yeah, this is Ajeng, our student as well from the Master Program for Architecture. Silahkan.
Ajeng.
Ajeng.
Yeah. Ajeng. Listen, I read your question on the chat. So if you want,
well, you can directly answer, it's fine.
Yeah, I hope the other students have seen it. But you know, as I said from the beginning, I am scandalized by the fact that the convention has not adjusted its definitions. I tried, you know, because you know the historical language is 10 years old. You know, in 10 years they should have. And by the way, this was tried. We tried many times, but for some reason this never happens. And sometimes I start thinking of a plot. Now, some people don't want it, you know, because you know. But first of all, you cannot change the convention per se, because it's an act. I mean, you cannot change it. But you can adjust the operational guidelines. Very simple. Now there is an annex. If you look at the operational guideline, which I'm sure you put under your pillow when you go to bed, you know, because it's you will see that there are some annexes, you know. And one annex, if I'm not wrong, is the Annex 3, deals with cities. But the way they deal with cities is absurd. I don't know. This thing was written really in the prehistory in terms of urban concepts. I think it was done in the 1990s or some 30 years ago, and nobody ever changed it. So my proposal was kill completely this Annex 3 and just put it in, trash it, you know, and put it in the bin, and leave it, you know, and reopen the definition of historic. We're using the historical landscape, and I think we will achieve that at some point, you know, because there is no solution. You cannot present today an historic area and call it a group of buildings. You know, it's something ridiculous. And this everybody says it's ridiculous. By the way, ICOMOS totally agrees. ICROM totally agrees. Even AUCN has urban agrees. We talk to member states, they all agree, but that doesn't happen. So I don't know why. And so we have to work harder. And I think one of the issues that we will discuss in June in the new heritage approach will be exactly this one. Ajeng.
Okay, thank you very much for your explanation, Mr. Bandarin, and also thank you for the opportunity, Bu Sita.
Terima kasih sama-sama. Thank you so much. And now Hamzah Al-Azadullah.
Yeah, on the tourism. Yeah, sorry, I'm just reading it. Make it good. Look, this is a big issue, and I would say perhaps the biggest issue we have is how to deal with tourism in historic cities. Because on one side, we want them, because I know they support the economy and jobs and livelihood of people. I mean, you cannot say you want to. Look what's happening today with the COVID. You know, it's a global catastrophe. You know, and you know, many countries, emerging countries, are really suffering. Probably even Indonesia in terms of you know, lack of tourism, because a lot of people are living out of there. The people that run services, hotels, transport, and so on, and not to mention the creative industries that produce things for them. So it's a disaster. So we want the tourism. What we don't want is the cities to be turned into tourist villages. This is the key issue. And where is the line? Where is the line? How to manage it? So I think, mayors, and therefore the population that resides in these cities, should be very, very careful about this thing. Now, try always to manage this process in order not to pass a line in which, after which, a city is not a city anymore. It's a tourist village. Look, I talk with knowledge, because I am from a city very famous called Venice in Italy, which has become a tourist village. Because it's so popular, so important, so famous that everybody wants to go. And we have, in a given day, now it's, of course, COVID is changing but normally, in the tourist season, and which lasts 10 months out of 12, you have 2/3 to 1/3 is the ratio of tourist to local population. So you don't see the local population anymore because they're too few. It is not good. This is not what we want. We want something that is more balanced. So, but to achieve the balance, you need to manage, which means that you have to counter market forces through regulations and policies that allow people to remain there and in their houses and so on. I'm not talking out of fantasy. Cities like Paris, New York have done regulations to limit the number of houses that can be given to the Airbnb system, because Airbnb is the monster that swallows cities. Essentially, every city can be turned into a tourist village through the Airbnb. One app, they don't even know where it is. I mean, if you ask people, where is Airbnb? Nobody knows, because it's an app. And this app has more power than mayors. So cities have started limiting this and creating a regulation and control, of course, monitor, to avoid a complete suppression of a housing market for other uses, which can be either permanent, those who live population, or temporary. You have many temporary populations that don't need to occupy the housing stock for all year, like students or other things, or temporary workers and so on. But what's important is not to lose control, as it happened in my city, of the processes. Otherwise, you turn cities into tourist villages. Probably you said that Bandung has this thing. Probably Denpasar also that was built as a city. I don't know, maybe Yogyakarta. I don't know if Georgia is a tourist city, but certainly if it's not today, it will become, because of the efforts that we put in the conservation. It's a contradictory thing. It's like I showed at the beginning, with the French case. You create a district, you preserve the thing, you create a perfect plate for the tourist industry to come and replace your population. So you have to be careful.
Okay, next, there are still 3 questions then. Unita Adisaputri, can you read this one, or? Yeah,
do we have some? I'm reading.
Yes.
But I think you may see that my main preoccupation is exactly on this. It's on public engagement and public involvement, because and I think it's something that we have to learn to do better. Because it's something seen like something external to the technical process. You do your plans, your project, your design. You're a designer, you're an architect, and then there's something else, which is the population. No. That's not the way. It's just the opposite. You have to start integrating. In fact, you shouldn't even start designing before talking to people. So it really is the first one. You have to put it requires an act of humility. You are on the receiving side. You're not the one that gives the solutions. You're the one that receives the solutions, and then you are a technical intermediary between the population, the community, and so on, and the technical process. But it's really. I know that sometimes schools don't teach you that because it's. But you have to experiment on your own skin. If you don't do that, of course you remain a technical. It can be good, but you you don't influence the processes now, because politicians are very sensitive to what people say. So if your product, your technical result is strongly backed and supported by the population, then the politicians will be more sensitive, and you will add value to your own design effort.
Thank you. And from Uni Prihayati, asking about the rural area conservations. What is your
rural? Listen, again, rural. Rural has been the non-urban, but now we realize that it's not like this. First of all, because people want to come back, so it's much easier to move around now today. So you go back to, in the weekends, or so, and in many societies, the link to your original village is very important. Maybe also in your society. Somehow it's a place where you recognize your ancestors, your family, your values, and even some property sometimes you have, and so on. And this is happening in very big context. In China, it's happening. China, which we don't think is very particularly brilliant in conserving heritage, but because they have not been very good for many historical reasons, now they have discovered that heritage can be found in the villages. And they're right, it's true. The villages are, in fact, represent, a form of traditional heritage that is still there. We're studying this. We look at that. We looked at that, and with our 40,000 villages in China, big country, about 20,000 have been destroyed, but 20,000 are still there. Come on, it's not bad. And 20,000 villages, and so now the government has launched policies for the preservation of this heritage, and it's really an official policy, and people are very happy with that, because they can somehow found ways in which they're not always nailed to a metropolitan context, which sometimes is a bit claustrophobic and so on. So maybe you have the similar thing. You have to think about. So rural, it's becoming more integrated with urban life because of it's easy to move around and so on. It's because people want to have this relationship with the traditional thing, and I think also because you have a metropolitan context, which is more like a regional city. It's not really just a small, like a point. As a city. Metropolis is very big, so they tend to absorb and include rural territories. So we want to stress this as an important factor for conservation of values and traditional relationship that have an important dimension in urban life. Isnen.
And Isnen, she is asking regarding the best model for managing cultural heritage in the city government bureaucracy. What is your opinion in this case?
Well, I think the idea of the historical balance is to give you a methodology. An approach is a methodology. It's nothing more. So I don't think I can somehow say this is better than the other. I keep saying that diversity is so important that you have to find in your own context and in your own traditions, the guidance. But the approach is flexible enough to allow a lot of things. So if you ask me which is the best, is HUL, of course.
Okay, Francesco. Before we close and then take pictures together, I would like to invite my friends and your old friends, Ibu Catherine Kubontubuh. So from the chairperson, president of Indonesian Heritage Trust. Maybe
Hello.
You remember
Katrini,
her.
yes, of course.
Yes. Okay, Bu Catrini, please.
Terima kasih, Bu Sita. Hi, Professor Bandarin. Yeah, thank you.
Nice to meet you, Katrini. Hello.
Yeah, it's really great to meet you again, even it's virtually. Yeah, it has been more than 20 years ago. Yeah, when I
remember
yeah,
really well.
With the lead of Mr. Ardike,
sure.
The potential of World Heritage nominee in Bali. And this is really related with what you talked today. So still remember how enthusiastic you encourage us to propose the mother temple of Besaki.
Look, it was a fantastic my experience in Bali. You know, I always remember. You know, in fact, I started in working with for Bali before even joining UNESCO.
This year of 2000, yeah, I think so.
With the World Bank, the 98 or something like this.
Yes, 98.
You remember maybe Karina Lennon was the youngest lady.
Yeah, we were together last time. Yeah.
And then you know, there were some Australians and so on. Anyway, we did it, and then when I became the director of the World Heritage Center, you know, it was in 2020. You know, sorry, in 2000 exactly. I said the first thing I want to do is to push for the nomination of Bali. Because you will not believe it, but the first ever
a great lesson learned, because I remember well, you encouraged the mother temple of Besaki on the time.
Yeah, but
and
that didn't work.
Unfortunately, it was cancelled because it was rejected by the Balinese community themselves. So that's what I mean.
I understand that it's, but you know, overall, the nomination is still representative. But you know, my first ever mission with UNESCO was in Bali, actually, and then it took 12 years to get it. It's a long process.
But
I like the nomination. It's very good. It's almost like a model nomination, because you have somehow different sectors and sections of the city, you know, or the island, to represent the different values. So, Katrini, let me say that I think you've done a very, very good job there, and I really hope to come back at some point and discuss it with you. So
yes,
that's the point. That I think I have an assignment from also to talk to you. That's on behalf of BPPI, Indonesian Heritage Trust, where I'm the chairman, and Ibu Sita also the other chairs. I think some other
I'm missing your
also affiliated with this. It's our international advisor.
Excellent.
So it is a great opportunity to welcome you on our board.
Very good.
And then if you say yes, then
I say yes.
The
good. Thank you.
Look, I told you,
I
am passionate of Indonesia and your culture. So you know, you just open it's an open door. You know, tell me. The problem is that we can't move now because of this disaster. But you know, soon I think I'll be vaccinated. I will try to. So let's keep in touch, Katrina, and also Sita. Now let's keep in touch, and we will do this kind of thing. It's very interesting and important. And of course, you know, whenever it would be possible, I would love to come and physically, you know, and give lectures there. You know, that would be a privilege and an honor for me to be able to come.
You're always welcome.
And visit you. So I want to take a picture, but people have to open up their cameras, otherwise we don't.
Okay.
So students, open up your camera.
Thank you, Bu Catrini, and let's Mas Abi will take pictures of us. There will be 5 layers of historic urban landscape. Okay, silakan Mas Abi.
Yeah, may I start? Okay, taking the screenshot. Okay, this is the first one. All right, the second one.
We have 113 people. It's big.
The third one. Fourth one. And the last one. It seems like not everyone opening up their
but we have
camera, but right, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mas Abi.
Very good.
Thank you.
So, Sita, thank you very much. It's been really a pleasure to meet you and have a exchange with your very brilliant students that you have. And let's say that. Let's say this is a beginning, right? And we will continue. And I really hope that. Hello, Francis. Thank you very much. Really hope to at some point to join you there and spend some time there, because you know, as I said, I consider it an honor to be your guest. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And bye-bye to everybody.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, and stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Bye-bye.